Hello, everybody. Thank you very much for coming to this particular talk. We are going to be today talking about the topic of what is Gnosis. And as you can see, it's being presented to you through Gnosis England, which is part of the Gnostic Cultural Association. Um, Gnosis in itself helps us to live our lives rather than exist within our lives. It gives us the tools and techniques we need to find a better life for ourselves, and at the same time gives us contact with or a channel to that which is the universal knowledge or universal gnosis. So we're going to go into this talk by beginning in terms of what this gnosis actually means. As you can see, timeless wisdom. So what's that? It's a timeless wisdom that is or has been rediscovered and reconfigured to suit the prevailing culture of any particular era or geographical region. Gnosis in itself is not the latest mind, body, and spirit trend. Gnosis has been retaught by many avatars, prophets, and teachers throughout the millennia. Gnosis has been around as long as humanity, we can say, but it was only formalized as a word, Gnosis, by the ancient Greeks. Parts of Gnosis are contained in all spiritual teachings, past, present, and the future, because they relate to, or the Gnosis relates to, the very humanity who is trying to find that Gnosis. So it's always going to contain, always will be here, always will be in the future, something which is within the minds and hearts of those who are searching for something more than the horizontal life, the rat run, the get up, go to work, do some things, and then at the end of the day, go to bed again. We're trying to go away or above or move apart from that particular style of existence to try and go deeper. And we can say that that is moving towards the gnosis. The gnosis in itself is wisdom, is objective knowledge found in any particular moment of anyone's life, whether it's in their own personal gnosis, personal life, or whether it's something which is found in or throughout nature and the cosmos. And as you can see at the bottom there, it says gnosis with the symbol over the O. And you can see the ancient Greek terminology for the same word, gnosis or gnosis. But that leads us to what we now call gnosis. And this gnosis in itself is founded upon the four pillars of wisdom. Aristotle said, the study of truth requires a study of causes. The causes through which everything comes to pass are four in number. So when we talk about the truth with the capital T, we are talking about that wisdom, that direct, objective knowledge of anything occurring in any particular moment, which leads us to these four pillars, or the four in number he refers to. The four pillars are art, philosophy, mysticism, and science. And we're going to touch on each of those in the next few slides. We can say that the four pillars represent a golden thread, you could say, which links all of the great teachings, schools, humanities, epochs together, which is the golden thread of gnosis, this profound, deep, objective wisdom. And this wisdom does not belong to any particular epoch or time, as you've already said. It will continue into the future beyond any race or humanity or uh, ownership is not part of that. So let's move on. Art. Art gives us the keys to nourish and understand inwardly. Um, the art we can find in the beauty of dance or music, particularly classical music or sculpture, poetry, Mother Nature, etc. All of us give us, or excuse me, all of those things give us um, a nourishment, an inward nourishment, something which gives our consciousness, that which is within us, something to reflect on and consider in terms of our spiritual development. And we'll talk more about this as we go through this particular class. It gives us direction in terms of self-discovery, trying to find the reasons beyond the intellectual for life existing. And it that in that way, the art is also related to like the skill we have or we can develop in our daily life, enabling us to live that life in a particular kind of way. In other words, we're able to find the hidden meaning of the day-to-day moment, but that requires a skill, a knack to be able to find that. Next, in those pillars of wisdom, we have philosophy, which ties into that one we've just mentioned, the art and the skill, because what we're trying to do in this school, in these classes through the philosophy, is try to find um, the way in which we can critically develop something inside us called self-awareness and then ultimately self-observation. It's beginning to learn how we can look at ourselves. Generally, most people in humanity don't spend time looking at themselves. They spend time looking outward. And again, we'll come on to this later. But at that same time, when we're starting to learn about ourselves, critically looking at ourselves, then we ought to also come to the conclusion that to do that, we need to be in the moment, the here and now, which relates to, as you can see in the bottom right, what is currently called mindfulness, trying to be in the present all the time. So that's a way of living life, learning to live in the moment, because time in itself is a product of the mind. It's all relative. We know that two people can go to any particular event, whether it's a party or a funeral or I don't know, a school lesson. One of them can find that time that they're at that event goes very quickly, and somebody else might find that it goes really slowly. Excuse me. That's because two people have a different perception of the event which is occurring that they are living within, or rather, what we could say is that they're existing within. And so, therefore, time in itself is a product of the mind. And we say, well, people have stop clocks and they have amazing atomic clocks and all this. But even that, science has shown that time is relative. Time is not real. It depends on the moment and the speed in which that moment is being lived. That's the relativity part. So for us as students of Gnosis in this school, in this class, when we talk about philosophy, we're talking about, back to the art, we're trying to live our life in a particular way to be able to see where we are in any moment so we can extract the gnosis, the wisdom from that moment. Okay, so let's move to mysticism. Excuse me. Mysticism, or we could say religion. But when we say the word religion, we need to understand that it ultimately comes from the Latin relegare, or to retie, or we can um, think of it in another way. The word yoga means to reunite. So relegare, to retie or rejoin, and yoga, to reunite, brings us to the point where we can consider that we can say, well, what are we reuniting with? What are we rejoining with? Well, it's the divine part within us, something within our life, something in the very depths of our consciousness is a mystical part of our existence or life. And what we're trying to say with this aspect, this pillar, which supports gnosis, is that we are all trying to find and search for the inner mysticism, or the inner uh, reality, which is more than just the physical. Each one of us in our daily life is sometimes finds unexplainable things, or maybe we have an inspiration. We feel amazed and in awe of the sunrise, or of a flower, or an animal, whatever. Or we may feel particularly um, sad or happy or joyful in any particular moment, because we feel that the influence of something divine around or within us is occurring. And it's the same, as you can see here, there's various ceremonies occurring, and those ceremonies in different religions, in different ways, help bring those people taking part in that moment closer to the mysticism, closer to that which we could call the divine within. Okay, so that's the third pillar. The final pillar is science. And in Gnosis, we give, and through this series of classes, we're going to talk about all these practices here you can see, and more, okay? Because the expectation is for the students of Gnosis that they are going to verify, experiment, and discover the reality of all of what is going on in the internal worlds, what is happening in the psychological domain, what is happening in that person's daily life. In other words, we are able to discover the link to the internal through inspired knowledge. In other words, we're proving to ourselves, verifying the teachings which we'll be getting in this course online, and any books you read, any videos you see about Gnosis. Um, and the proof of you could say, the doctrine is in the application of these practices. Because we can say, as you can see, it's like wearing a tool belt with many tools. All these different practices are different tools to help us find gnosis in any particular moment. And we can consider the wisdom of the eye versus the wisdom of the heart. Okay, so all those tools and techniques are great to hear about. All those um, ideas and concepts about philosophy or art or mysticism are all wonderful to hear and talk about, or to read or see a video or social media, but we need to turn them into something real within us, something objective and tangible. And so when we talk about this thing called the wisdom of the eye, that is something when we read or see any particular book or video, whatever it is, even a person speaking, we are going to intellectually take that information into us, which is going to give us some degree of wisdom. But what we need to do is turn that wisdom into the wisdom of the heart, which is related to the consciousness. So let's look at that in more detail. We're trying to find gnosis on this, excuse me, gnosis or knowledge on this course. And on this side, you can see that this intellectual knowledge, the doctrine of the I or the wisdom of the I, relates to the mind, the memory, the intellect, etc., and gives us a subjective understanding, okay, which the ancient Greeks used to call episteme, okay, as you can see at the bottom there. However, on the other side of the coin, as you mentioned earlier, we have intuitive information rather than intellectual information. Intuitive information comes directly from the consciousness. It is not related to the mind, the memory, or the intellect. And so, therefore, what we're doing is rather than understanding something through reading, through information, instruction, or classes, etc., we're going deeper than that. We're trying to find direct experience, and that will give us comprehension. And ultimately, this is objective knowledge, which, as you can see on the bottom right, is what we call, what the ancient Greeks used to call gnosis. So you can see in which the way in which we need both parts of this diagram. We need the intellectual wisdom of the eye, but we also need the intuitive wisdom of the heart, because we need to be able to understand things objectively to enable us to find and achieve gnosis in those moments. And that gnosis is our own gnosis. No one can take it away from us. It's not a concept. It's not an idea. It is what we have found in our own work, our own inner work. So that means what we have is real and correct. And you can say true with a capital T, because it's not been uh, given to us secondhand by a book or a person or a video. Okay, let's move on. Now we need to think that from a psychological point of view, we are asleep. An example might be now in this particular moment, feel your bum on the seat that you're sitting on. Feel the clothes that you're wearing. Now you're becoming aware of your breathing. Look out of your eyes as though they are windows. Unfortunately, most people, most of the time, are psychologically asleep. We, on this course, are trying to wake up psychologically so we can exist and be within that moment and see the objective gnosis. By looking out of our eyes like windows, by becoming aware of our breathing and feeling our clothes and how we're sat or our posture or standing, whatever it is, we are intensifying, or rather, you could say, waking up to information that's coming into our mind all the time, but we just ignore it because we are not aware. So all we've done is, if we look out of our windows as though we're, look out of our eyes as though they're windows, it really does look or seem that we are inside and everything is outside. Excuse me. So we can ask the question, well, who lives awake? How many people live like that they're actually conscious and aware of where they are directly, not having a concept of what it's like to be awake, but actually being awake. And that leads us on to the next point. Who perceives the reality? Who inside us, which part of us inside our physical body is actually perceiving the reality? Well, when we start to consider everything that comes in through the five senses, i.e. the eyes, the taste, the what we can hear, what we smell, touch, etc., those five senses are perceived by the mind. Everything comes into the brain. Every impression comes into the brain, and in the brain is the mind, or the mind operates through the brain. Excuse me. So, who is perceiving the reality in that moment? because people say, I'll change my mind about whatever topic, which means that we are not the same as the mind. We are not the same as the mind. So who is perceiving reality? Generally, it is an automatic intellectual process, and we decide we can hear someone when they're talking to us and we answer in a particular way. But at the same time, we can go deeper and say, well, that in the background, that thing which is generally not awake is our consciousness. We are not conscious in any particular moment unless we choose to be conscious. And most people, most of the time, don't choose to be conscious. We just react mechanically through our preconceptions to any particular impression that comes into our mind. So, for example, we can say in any particular room, maybe there's 5 people in the room, and there's one table, one physical table. You could ask in those people to describe the table, and there would be 5 different descriptions of the table from those 5 different people. And then, of course, there will be the table itself. So there will be 5 preconceptions or concepts or ideas about what the table is, and then there'll be the table itself, because everything is done through the mind, through subjectivity. And this brings us to Maya. Is Maya reality? Everything we see out there, everything we feel, touch, smell, taste, is actually a process, or has been given to us through a process. Our mind decides what in any moment we are smelling. If we pay attention to the smell in that particular moment, then our mind tells us, oh, that's the smell of a flower, that's the smell of chicken, that's the smell of fresh air. But the next person beside us may have a completely different uh, version of what that smell is inside their mind at that moment. So the Maya, or the Maya, the reality, is not true. But to find that true reality, we need to be in the moment. We need to awaken consciousness. We need to be psychologically awake. This is a representation on the bottom left here of what is called Plato's cave, Plato being the ancient Greek philosopher. You can see the people on the left at the bottom sat against the cave wall, looking at shadows on the wall, projected onto the wall. And they believe that that is life. And then you can see other people holding up the symbols, and the light from the fire is casting that shadow onto the back wall of the cavern, and those people are looking at that as life. And they're imprisoned in that life. But then you can see the other side of the cave, people are actually going beyond that. They're starting to understand how the let's use the word mechanicities of those people holding those objects and that fire works in terms of how the people who are imprisoned in the left-hand side are actually seeing reality. And you can see that there's a process of escaping from that, eventually getting out of the cave and getting out under that bloke on the right-hand side. He is in freedom. He is liberated. He is directly under the sun, and the shadow is of himself. So that is Plato's cave, and that's maybe where we all are at this moment. We are trapped inside that cave, believing that what we are seeing, which is subjective, is reality. Well, actually, on this course, we're trying to find objectiveness. We're trying to go beyond all of that, trying to escape from this cave. We're going to go beyond the Maya. We're going to perceive the reality through our own consciousness, our active consciousness. So, where are we and where do we live? Well, there's the exterior world. I think that's somewhere in America. And what's going on? What's happening in that moment? The person, any one of us, seeing an image of all this stuff, there'd be noise there, there'd be smells there. That's just the external. But that's only part of what life is, because on the other side of the coin, we have an interior world. An interior world, but the question is, what is happening there? And most of the time, most of us don't pay attention to what is happening in the internal world, the interior world in which we live. And our interior world directly impacts the exterior. How we perceive the exterior is based on the condition of our internal world. If we are very happy because we've just won the lottery, we will have a particular internal view of everything. And so the external world will be lovely. But if we've just lost our job or there's been a death in the family, then our external perception may be tainted by the interior state we are in. So we need to start to look at what is happening inside us because the um, fact is that we need to know ourselves because in a we live in a world which is the interior world which we don't know. We do not know that the internal world or how the internal world works. And the bit that is looking or trying to find that internal reality is the consciousness. And it's that same consciousness which gives us the yearning to try to find the truth. It's like something embedded in our day-to-day life. We feel, but we can't describe that there must be more to life. There must be more to than just getting up, eating breakfast, going for a job, coming back, eating a meal, and then going to bed. There must be more to that. Well, yeah, there is. It's the internal reality. And we need to find that internal reality and start to understand it. Because living in a world that we don't know, this internal world, brings us all kinds of perils, problems, and conflicts. Okay. And because the that interior world defines how we live our external world or in the external world, that is very important to understand. The internal world or the interior world needs to be understood so that we can live in our external life more correctly, more in tune with the internal realities. So we actually start to live our life consciously in a state of alert perception rather than existing like mechanistic machines. All of these things will be talked about in more detail later in the course because we have not received any information or education about the internal world. How can we understand it if we don't even know, or we know very little about what the truth is of our internal world? So let's go further. Where do we find the key to the development of our infinite possibilities? Consciousness. And you can see here is represented in this image as a kind of glowing light in the heart. Consciousness is something which is part of our psychology, obviously, but part of our psychology which is normally overwhelmed by the activities of the mind and the general day-to-day reactions we have to different situations, whether it's anger, whether it's lust, whether it's pride, etc. And again, those are aspects of ourself we'll talk about in the next lecture. But the consciousness is the place in where we can find the truth, where we can start to utilize and get to know ourselves through practices. And of course, this conscience or consciousness needs to be active. The consciousness in itself as conscience is one thing, but to be active is another, to give ourselves the internal stimulus, we could say, to be conscious in a way which is dynamic, active, and real is something which we need to discover on this course, and we'll be talking about it a lot more. So, to enable us to uh, go further on this course and from a psychological point of view, begin to look at ourselves with a view to changing ourselves, we need to look at and consider the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness. So if our consciousness is generally asleep, generally we are not aware of all the things that are happening inside and outside of us. We are more or less psychologically asleep. With these three factors, we are able to awaken the consciousness and move forward in our spiritual development. Number one there you can see is the mystical death, which is basically where we purify our internal landscape or internal psyche. We can say that at the moment in our psyche, there's a lot of stuff which we don't need, don't want, but in fact, it drives the mechanicity, is the very reason for us being psychologically asleep. Therefore, if we're able to clean out that stuff from inside ourselves, we're going to purify ourselves. This is not having a bath. This is a psychological work, which we're going to talk about in the next few lectures. Then you can see number two on the bottom right is called birth. The birth is about creating. So using the energy we have within, that energy is basically what we receive from what we eat, obviously, from what we breathe, and from the impressions we see and which come into us every day. Those are used to create energy within us, and then how we utilize that energy within us in a spiritual way is what this particular factor of the revolution of the consciousness is talking about. In other words, we're going to utilize energy within in a conscious manner to enable us to develop that consciousness yet further and to apply practices which enable us to intensify our spiritual development. And then finally, as you see, sacrifice for humanity is basically to share, but consciously share. So if we have learnt our own gnosis through the application of the practices and teachings we've already talked about today, then we share that we share that information with other people, and we do so in a conscious way, for example, with empathy, with compassion, with love, you can say, then we are sharing our version of gnosis with other people without any need or requirement for any sort of payback. Is what you could say in a disinterested way. We are sharing consciously, and therefore we are giving and sacrificing for other people, for humanity. There's no ulterior motive. We give because of love. So those three aspects form the three factors of the revolution of the consciousness. And let's look at those a bit more. So the death is about liberating the light and self-purification. We've already talked about this slightly just now, where we have within our psychology a lot of consciousness, we can say essence, another name for the same thing. That essence is trapped within the psychological prison which we have manufactured over time for that particular piece of consciousness. And again, we'll talk about this in more detail in future lectures. But what we're saying here is through the mystical death, we're able to remove all the rubbish, remove that prison, remove the barrier so that that light can escape, that light can be liberated. That is the self-purification. That is the phoenix from the ashes we talked about just there on the right-hand side. The transmutation of the energies, or the rebirth, is what we also touched upon. So we're talking about the way in which the management of energy, all energy within our physical body, is utilized in a way that it is not wasted. And you can see there on the right, that creature, the Orobus, is eating its own tail. In other words, the energy is being kept within the same location, a symbol for that. And on the left-hand side, you can see the chakra, Muladhara, with that snake coiled 3.5 times. That would be the Kundalini. And we're going to be talking about that later in the course as well. Okay, so that's the transmutation of energies, or the birth or rebirth. And then finally, the sacrifice for humanity, sharing and selflessness, as you would expect, is where we give, as we just mentioned, consciously, without uh, any expectation of payback in any way. We give because we have learned something, we have learned or discovered gnosis in any particular way or moment, and then we give that or share that with others in a disinterested way. So what we can say overall then is, on a personal level, Gnosis is an in-depth study of our everyday psychology, habits, and behaviors with the view to changing ourselves for the better. Okay, quite intro. This is interpersonal level. It is the art and the science of living in harmony and integrating with all living beings and in accordance with the laws of the cosmos. Okay, so we were able to integrate on an interpersonal level to find that gnosis which is everywhere in everything, the universal gnosis, we could say. On an internal level, it is the continuous effort to connect with the divine within and create the necessary conditions to fuse with that divinity permanently, which is what we would call self-realization or enlightenment. So it's a continuous effort to try and awaken consciousness, to try and be in the moment, to try and feel the here and now. And at the same time, in those moments, to feel and be connected to divinity within. That would be the mysticism we talked about, that pillar of mysticism. That pillar relates to the relegare, the reuniting or retying or rejoining with that innermost part within each one of us, the intimate. So that's gnosis on the internal level. And in summary, we can say gnosis means wisdom, knowledge of the heart, direct experience of the divine, the truth or reality. We can say it's a reliable psychological and spiritual process to permanently awaken the consciousness, to give us enlightenment. It's a process that is based upon the 3 factors of the revolution of the consciousness, which is the mystical death, the birth or rebirth, and the sacrifice for humanity, all of which we've touched on today and will be going in deeper in subsequent lectures. Thank you very much.